your Bible tips for those unwanted occasions when temptation comes knocking at your door. My book addresses other prevalent issues as well, such as overcoming our struggle with pride, fear, and adversity. And right now, I'm pleased to send you a copy of But God, when you the growing ministry of Pathway to Victory. The study of Joseph is one of the most practical and relevant studies you'll embark on this coming year. Now, let's turn our attention to the subject at hand. I want to continue the message we introduced on Friday's program, founded on the story that's recorded in Genesis chapter 39. The overarching lesson is this: for your own weaknesses sabotage your life. Comes knocking at your door, pick up your belongings and run. Look at Genesis 39, verse 1. Now, been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. But the Lord was with him. And so Joseph became a successful man in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Notice this, what amounts to a parenthesis in verse 6. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Why is that important? Because it sets us up for the next episode in Joseph's life. He moves from elevation to temptation. Look at verse 7, Joseph's temptation. It came about after these events that Potiphar's wife looked at Joseph and she said, now that is a tame vanilla translation. You know what she really said? Have sex with me, Joseph. Joseph refused. And he said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master Potiphar, your husband, does it all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in the house, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because of mine. In other words, how could I sin against your husband when he's done so much for me? Not to mention that he's the chief executioner against Potiphar. But then, an even greater reason for refusing. Notice the last sentence of verse 9. And how then could I do this great evil and sin against God? To him, to Joseph, that was unthinkable, against God. And how did Mrs. Potiphar respond to his refusal? Look at verse 10. And she spoke to Joseph day after day. She wasn't about to give up. Ladies and gentlemen, don't fall for the delusion that once you say no to sin, you can rest. It's gone. On to the next challenge. Doesn't work that way. One of my concerns, what goes on in Christianity today, I got lots of concerns, but one of them is what I call deliverance theology. This idea that if you just pray a certain prayer or have a certain experience, you can be delivered once and for all from temptation and sin. There is no one-time deliverance from sin. The Christian life is a battle that goes on and on and on and on. Paul says, for we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against the unseen forces of darkness in heavenly places. She came to him day after day. What did he do? He did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to eat with her. You know, she was very smart in how she approached Joseph. She probably said something to her like, honey bunny, I need somebody who understands me. That old brute Potiphar, he doesn't understand me, but I can tell you understand me. We just need to talk, maybe hold hands a little bit. Is that okay? What did he say? He didn't fall for that. He didn't listen to her. He doesn't even want to be with her. He looks for every way possible to keep away from a good word here for us. When you face temptation, You don't see how close to the edge you can get. You don't allow for a little bit of sin just to satisfy yourself. I think of the words of a proverb I read in Chuck Swindoll's commentary. This proverb says, "He who wants to keep his garden tidy doesn't reserve a plot for weeds." If you're really intent on living a pure life that God blesses, you don't allow just a little bit of sin in your life and think you're doing something great because you don't have more sin in your life. Paul says it this way in Romans 13:14, "Make no provision for the flesh." Verse 11, now it happened one day that as Joseph went into the house to do his work, none of the men of the household was there inside. Joseph had right intentions. He was going into the house to do his work. He walks in, nobody's there. He said, "Did I not get the memo? Is this Memorial Day, the 4th of July? Well, why is nobody here?" By that, we know exactly what happened. Miss Potiphar arranged for everybody to have an extra day off that day. Verse 12 says, "And she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me, have sex with me.'" She's got hold of Joseph. Now, in this moment, does he say, "Miss Potiphar, I sense you have unmet need in your life that I'd like to talk to you about"? Does he reach into his coat and pick out an evangelistic booklet and say, "Miss Potiphar has a wonderful plan for your life"? Does he say, "Let's hold hands and let's pray about this temptation that God will get rid of it"? No. He knew this situation was too hot for his Hebrew hormones to handle. The way to succeed and resist the temptation could. In fact, the Bible says he left so abruptly, he ran so fast this temptation. Now, you might think a good ending to this story. She is left holding a piece of the garment. Potiphar returns home. Here's what has happened. Divorces his wife and elevates Joseph for another promotion. Is that how the story ends? No. Instead, his temptation and saying no to it led to his incarceration. Look at verse 14. Mrs. Potiphar, after Joseph ran away, called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, Potiphar has brought in a Hebrew to make sport of us. He came in for me to lie with me." And I screamed. Now, probably Mrs. Potiphar was the kind of woman who never spoke to her servants except to bark orders at them. But now she needed some allies. So she felt the same way I have about this foreigner that my husband brought into the house. Look at what he's done. He's brought disgrace to this household. And then verse 19, now when Potiphar heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. Now, many commentators have noted that there's every reason to believe Potiphar did not believe his wife's story completely. I mean, after all, if Joseph had really tried to, what do you think the chief executioner would have done? He would have been put to death right on the spot. There was probably a history Potiphar had with his wife. This wasn't her first indiscretion. She probably had a history of it. So he wasn't going to execute Joseph. Instead, he put him into jail, if you will, back into the pit again. But here's the big difference. The first time, because of a mistake he made, acting arrogant to his brothers, he was responsible for his situation. This time, he's placed in jail, placed into another pit, not for doing what is wrong, but for doing what is right. God was still with Joseph. And we'll see how God used this unfair accusation to put Joseph exactly where God wanted him. I want to pause right here and share with you 3 practical principles for what to do when sin comes knocking at the doorstep of your life. 3 principles, write them down. Number 1, hunters are also the hunted. Hunters are also the hunted. I remember reading an account of a man who was on a big game expedition in Africa. He had spent hours one day tracking a lion and finally had his lion cornered. to give the kill shot when something told him to turn around and look behind him. And to his horror, he saw a lion about to pounce on him. He had spent hours tracking this lion, hunting him down, not realizing at the same time, realizing he was being hunted as well. You know, the fact is, all of us are hunting something. Hunting significance, pleasure, wealth, fulfillment. But as we hunt those things, we should never forget we're being hunted as well by an adversary who wants to destroy everything important to us. Jesus described our adversary, the devil, this way in John 10:10, for the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. You know, had Joseph succumbed to Mrs. Potiphar's invitation, he wouldn't have only have been a victim of Mrs. Potiphar, who was hunting him, but for the enemy behind her, who was inspiring her to do what she did. You know, I'm going to ask you ladies to tune out for just a second, if you could. And let me just speak to the men here for a moment. Men, we can be so stupid, especially when we allow our lives and decisions to be governed by our testosterone. You know, in our culture, we paint the man as macho who goes after another sexual conquest. He is pictured in our culture as the victor, another conquest, another sexual conquest. We're so stupid that we don't know we're really the victim, not of another woman, but of Satan himself. Hunters are also the hunted. Listen to the way Solomon describes a man who thinks he is being the victor when he in fact is a victim. Proverbs 7 verses 18 to 23 talks about the adulteress who tries to seduce him. She says, "Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him. At the full moon he will come home." With her persuasions, she entices him. With her flattering, he follows her as an ox. The discipline of a fool, until an arrow pierces through his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, so he does not know it will cost him his life. In today's culture, I need to point out, to be fair, that many times it's not the woman, it's the man who is trying to take advantage of a woman, who is in a position of power over him, maybe in the workplace, maybe in a church, and he grooms his victim and waits for the moment to try to seduce her. It really doesn't matter in the end who initiates it. It is all a work of Satan, and it leads to destruction. Proverbs 6, he who would destroy himself does it. Never forget, you have an adversary who is hunting you while you think you're hunting another person. In 1 Peter 5:8, Peter said, "Be of sober spirit, be on the alert, for your adversary, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." Truth number 2, many times the most spiritual thing we can do is run. Joseph knew 60 more seconds and he would have been spiritual toast. He knew he needed to get out of there. And you know, when it comes to temptation, there are two kinds of people. There are those who try to live as close to the line of sin as possible without stepping over it. They're going to get up to the line as close as possible without hopefully stepping over into sin. There's another group of people who run and live as far away from the line as possible. You know, we have a name for that first group who live close to the line. We call them victims. It's only those who live as far away as possible that are the victors. I gave you the formula for how sin occurs. It's from James. But each person is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Remember that formula I gave you? plus the right bait plus a wrong choice equals sin.